Hey there, everybody. I'm Lucas Martell. I'm the creator of Walkabout Mini Golf, and here we are on the first tee of Quixote Valley. This was the very last one that we included in the base game, and before we get into our DLCs. And of course, so many people, one of the most classic mini golf tropes is the windmill. And I had a bit of a thing with that because I've always hated the windmill holes. And I always just felt like just every course that I'd played, they had the windmill. It was never very interesting. And so I decided, okay, if we're going to do windmills, let's do a windmill course that actually is like, this is the best windmill usage in mini golf that has ever been done. So we built this whole course around, so like, how do we do windmills in a really cool, interesting way? And we started first off of just, let's not just have windmills in there. Let's like build this whole course around the idea of this community that is wind powered. And I really love how this one came out just in terms of the tone. It's consistently one of the most popular ones, I think, just because I just want to live here. It's just this beautiful, peaceful, pastoral, but you've also got a view of the sea. At one point, Emma Mercado, I believe this was maybe the first course that she worked on. She is one of our modelers, but she's been doing a lot of the set dressing and a lot of the asset work. And she had even come up in her mind of this idea that at one point, maybe this was like a gang of pirates that had become shipwrecked from the sea and then moved up here and turned from a life of piracy into just making warm, cozy, beautiful things. So you might even notice that at a few places it even feels like some of the little bits are inspired by nautical stuff. There's even a ship's wheel that has been turned into it. That wasn't necessarily where it started, but we really have a great time adding in some of those like little storytelling beats. This hole number 4 actually is one of the gameplay examples of how I really wanted to take that windmill and turn it on its head. So usually you're always trying to putt through the windmill. I want to invert that. We found a way to make it so that the windmill is the thing that's actually going to save you from going over the cliff. And yeah, a lot of it was just taking that idea of the classic windmill hole and turning it on its head, using the windmills in fun, interesting ways. Even hole 1 where we came out was that idea, okay, you're still putting through the windmill, but in that case, you're actually inside the barn and coming out and you only see the spokes of this windmill. So going life size with it as opposed to the typical mini windmills, although we still got a couple of those in. I still love obviously I love the gag of this one where you come in and you just see that the sheep has completely wrecked the room that you were in before and turned it into a much harder hole than it had been previously. I do also love the daytime mode, especially just some of the work that Emma did, making that little nook right there, the little reading nook with the 3 windows and the bay view. It's just, I want that. I want that in real life. I want that to be my little reading nook. Here you see a few of those examples I had talked about was, retrofitting a spinning wheel, using some ship parts from all sorts of different stuff. The origin of this course, just really wanting to take windmills and go crazy with it. This one also has a bit of a special place for me, just because this was actually the last course that I did most of the design work on. Although I say that, I do want to give credit to all the team, but especially Henning Kachi. So Henning had actually taken over with most of the course designs after Original Gothic. He did Bogey's Bonanza and Tethys Station. And he has actually done the gameplay design for all of the DLC that you've seen. This was the last one, although we do have a couple more coming up that I've finally gotten to get back in the saddle and actually do some of the design work on. Yeah, this was just really fun to get back into that, because that design process was always one of my favorite parts of the process. And as the team was growing and as just like we were needing to put out more courses, I had to give that up for a little while. So this was, this is the last course that people have seen that I actually got to do most of the design work on. But it still was fantastic because this was also the first time that I was working with the larger team, and a lot of the elements, Zach Alexander, one of our concept artists, he did a lot of the work on the windmills and creating these little tableaus of just different, unique windmills. Henning, actually, I was really struggling with the back nine, and Henning came up with that giant windmill that you see off there, this like expansive bridge. It just felt like it really needed to have a big set piece thing back there. And he just drew this design that's just like, oh yeah, once that was in there, suddenly the back nine started working and started to feel cohesive with the whole rest of the world. So here we are coming up to hole number 6. One of the other things I love about this course is that this was the first time that we got away from traditional mini golf in terms of having very clear barriers and borders. You're not doing as many bank shots in this one. It's rolling along these very rolling hills. It was very much inspired by real golf, but of course we do still have these giant telephone pole sized logs that are like forming some barriers. But I really love this organic feel. I think it also makes the courses very fun to play because there's so many options in terms of how you play the hole. You really can, from any spot on the course, get up and do some crazy trick shots, bounce off of rocks, just really anything and everything goes in this course. And I love that there is a bit of more of a risk factor to that, where yeah, you can even hit at something in this, even right here, you could hit it right at that. And if you hit it just right, you can roll back in. But if you go just a little too hard, you'll roll off. This was also something that really, using Gravity Sketch really allowed this course to happen. Because in Gravity Sketch, I believe it was even as this course was being made, they added a soft select tool, which allows you to edit the vertices of an object, but then you can mush it around in a really organic way. So the way that these holes were actually made was mostly by, and this is actually the technique that we now use for all of our sand and everything, but we actually like just completely filled in like an area around a flat plane, and then literally just smushed the barriers around until they formed the shape that we wanted. It gives it a really cool, natural, low poly look. It works really well and it'd be doable in other packages, but something about doing it in VR, it's just a fun, intuitive, and natural way to work, and it makes creating some of these holes just a lot of fun, as opposed to sometimes they can be very highly technical modeling work that you have to do. But yeah, this one was just a lot of fun to create. I really wanted this pastoral feel, and so one of the directions that I had for everybody was to, let's keep it fairly light. Let's not add too much stuff, because I want enough room in just our rendering budget to add flowers just everywhere. And so we came up with these extremely low poly flowers that if you look at them, like each of these flowers is only like 5-6 triangles. They're very light. But what we found is that if you just imply that very rough shape and the wind, which Craig Kohlmeyer, our senior tech artist, added, man, does that really just bring the course to life. And this was also the very first course that we had wind going on in it, not only on the plants, but also on the light strings that are up ahead. There's even some cloth that's on the large windmills. And I believe even a couple of the other bits and bobs all around the course, like some of the laundry even blows in the wind, which was just a really, cool effect. But yeah, the direction was basically keep it lightweight because we want to add flowers everywhere. And I forget how many we actually ended up adding. It also depends on what you define as a flower, because we found that for many of the ones that are way off in the distance, it's very painterly. It's very like a French impressionist would do flowers, just with polygons, just a smattering of triangles that are in the right color and moving in the right way. Gives you that sense of, oh yeah, there's a cluster of lilacs over there or something. Yeah, I'm just really happy with how that density of vegetation worked out. And we took that lesson. That's how we did both Welcome Island, the revised Welcome Island, as well as all of the vegetation in El Dorado. It's all using that same technique. Just really force yourself to only use a couple of triangles and then make up for it with the volume that you're able to get. These two holes, 8 and 9 respectively, were also using the windmill in a new and interesting way. So that point that you're actually playing on a moving surface that's lifting you up, and then having to use that as a ramp to help let you down without going off the backside of the cliff. That was specifically designed to be that final big usage of the windmill, because as we get down here to hole 9, We're also coming up to one of the other firsts that this course was, which is the introduction of the wind mechanics. As we're approaching hole 10 and the back 9 of the course, I also want to show off just all the great work that, again, Craig Kohlmeyer, our lead tech artist, did. That lightning in the clouds was something that I knew that I wanted. It's something that I've seen a lot in real life. I grew up in central Illinois, and I just remember in the summer, you would see these giant storms rolling in. And there was just something always really cool about seeing lightning at a distance, where you see all the lightning flashes, and it's this sort of calm before the storm, especially with the wind that's starting to blow through here. It just really creates a mood, but it's also still peaceful. It's like there's a summer storm coming, but now everyone's sitting around waiting for it to hit. I feel like that's something that a lot of people have experienced. We also saw it when the company started, where we were in Belize working on the Ocean Maker. We had a lot of storms come through, and you would just see these storms out to sea. Sometimes they were coming towards you. Sometimes it was just, these massive clouds with all this epic lightning that was just off in the distance. And it just really adds a lot of life and a lot of atmosphere to the environment. So here we are at hole 9. This is also a great time to show off a bunch of the other things that we had done for the very first time on this course. Because this was the introduction of the wind mechanic, Craig Kohlmeyer did spend a good bit of time really working out a way that we could show the influence of the wind in a very organic way that still felt like it was diegetic, or like it still belonged in the world. Some games, that they would actually do like more graphic little bits here and there. So he did a couple of things. A lot of it was creating this edge of flower petals right where the wind zone starts, keeping it completely free, but then the safe areas all become covered with these little petals of flowers. It was, just a great touch in terms of how that worked and how well that sort of sold the idea without having to add in like a more video gamey UI thing. Also, I love this very anime-esque, these little wisps of wind that are coming through that actually do very graphic loop-de-loops. And I just really like how it marries the styles with something that is both semi-realistic, but then also, very graphic. One of the other big inspirations for this course was some of the films of Hayao Miyazaki. Not that, obviously, we didn't take anything directly from it, but just that vibe. There was just something about that illustration style that leaned into that graphic quality, and we wanted it to feel a bit like you were in one of those films, like that you were on the mountains in a Howl's Moving Castle, or there was I've just always loved his movies, and especially that art style. It was also one of the inspirations for giving us these really big, epic skies, which really just clinches that feel of just this really pleasant pastoral place that you want to be. Here we are on hole 11, moving up to hole 12. If you look at how the wind blows, we don't have any wind on the front 9, but the general idea was that if you look at especially from God view, that there's actually this sort of channel. So the general idea was that always coming from sea, that this whole sort of valley that we're in right now pushes all of the wind. And you do see that it sort of curves around, and that's where you get to the giant windmill up at the top. So it becomes this like windy canyon, like in a lot of real life canyons, but also in cities, like in both New York and Chicago, there's certain spots that are just, you always get the lay of those giant buildings just always tends to create this howling wind. I think it's called the Hawk in New York. I've only witnessed it or experienced it once, and it's pretty intense how that actually happens. But that was one of the reasons for the justification of being able to do the windmills, but then also the wind on the back 9 in a way that was two different things, but it feels like you're in the village for the first half, and then out on the back half, the back 9, you're more out in the fields, just to give a different feeling between the day mode and the night mode. It also meant that we were not using the windmills as much. In the front 9, you're really playing with the windmills and directly on them. But it also felt like that after 9 holes of that, it felt like, okay, the windmills they're fun. We could have come up with a few more holes that were around them, but it started to get a little, I don't know, it just became a little less interesting. And This was, I believe, also really the first course that we've added any new mechanics outside the traditional just static courses or maybe moving objects. And having this wind effect was, yeah, the very, very first mechanic that we've added. I guess I'm thinking now that we've used a similar thing since then, like even in 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, there's a couple of pipes that both suck and blow out. Yeah, so we've started using a bit more of those, and a couple of the upcoming courses are even going to take that idea of some new mechanics a lot further than you've seen before. Great example of just really telegraphing the windy spots. This is one of the most challenging, just because we put the hole right in the middle of the wind field, so you really can get to a spot where you are forced to use the wind and adapt to it. There is a pretty consistent hole-in-one path that a lot of us have figured out that's really satisfying, though, when you just bounce off that rock and it just rolls straight into the hole. It just is a very satisfying feel. So here we are coming up to hole number 14, the steps. So because we're on this giant cliff, we actually spent a lot of time modeling those steps, and you can fully walk up there. You can walk all the way up to the top of the cliff. The general idea was that those were pastures, so that you've got sheep on one side or on the other with the bridge leading between them. And that was one of those things that we didn't need to do that because it has nothing to do with mini golf, but we both wanted something to just give a little bit more detail to that cliff. One of the things that we always find is that if you can have a big section that's very low poly that doesn't have a lot of detail, and then just adding little sections of high detail really makes the whole thing feel alive. So that whole idea, I believe that Zach Alexander drew it, and then Emma Mercado did the work on actually building it. Like I said, it was actually a pretty decent chunk of work to build that staircase just digitally. But yeah, you can walk all the way up to the top, and it does factor into the fox hunt, which you could do here in the hard mode, where you've got to actually climb up that. But yeah, it's a really fun spot to just climb all the way up to the top and just look out over the whole course. It's, yeah, just a great vantage point. This was the course where we started to realize just how much that broader world really played in, and having those activities that aren't part of mini golf, but it's just a pleasant place. And there's just something about stairways that when people see stairways, they're like, I have to climb them. So a lot of people take the time to actually hike all the way up the stairs and get that beautiful view from the top. So here we are on hole 14. Another great example of this just very naturalistic gameplay style. There's no right angles, creates some unique bounces and some ramps. The great thing about designing holes like this is that it really does let people play them the way they want to play them. And if you just lay down rocks that have all sorts of different shapes, like people find some crazy routes to get to the top that you would never anticipate, never could have designed for. Put it in the hands of the player that they can play a hole 100, 1,000 different ways and get drastically different results. Here we are coming up to hole 15. This was also the first time that we really started doing more with really having people playing off the greens, and this idea that you're really going off the beaten path and just having to roll across natural landscapes and everything. All of the little set deck, just like the carts, the hay, the pitchforks, just all these little details. They don't need to be in there, but if they weren't, you would really miss it, I feel. Here is hole number 16. Coming up to the grist mill. This tower was a really difficult thing to design for. We actually had the tower built first, and then we realized that we needed to fit holes in here, but it's a pretty tight space that you've got to work with, which it was a little difficult to do, but I think that it also forced us to come up with some new interesting ways of doing some things and creating some holes that I don't think that we necessarily would have come up with. So it's a very organic process, how the holes and the environment go hand in hand. Sometimes you've got a hole and you design the environment around it. Other times you've got the environment, you've got the pieces, and you need to come invent a hole that fits into the spot. This was also a big layout change from the easy version. You go downstairs and then come out to hole 17. But we really wanted to make a couple of these holes a lot bigger. So we really just amped up the height on this one and forced you to not only putt into the wind and deal with the wind as you are falling, but also having to avoid the blades of the windmill as they come around. So yeah, in the easy mode, you could always walk up here, and it was just an interesting place to visit. But In the hard mode, it actually becomes part of a bit of a change in the layout of the course. This is also one of my favorite spots on the course to hang out in, especially with the sound design. This was probably the most intense, at least up until probably the Nautilus and Mist were more than that. But at the time, we just hadn't done as much with moving objects. And this course just really needed a lot of highly local sound effects. A lot of the sound effects, they did come from libraries, but to get all these giant windmill sounds, you've got cloth flapping, you've got these giant like wooden rotors, just this groaning and creaking of wood. I really love the sound that it creates. But yeah, this was definitely the most complicated sound design that had been done to date, just to really make this environment feel real and really feel like you're standing next to these giant wooden machines. Here we are, hole 17, going up to the tee of 18. One of the other big design ideas behind this course was this view looking back at the cliffs and seeing all the windmills is just so cool and so iconic that we really did a lot of work to try to just force the walkabout path to circle back in a way that you end 18 with this really distant view. I love when you're up in those hills walking around, but something about this particular spot where you actually get a chance to look back at all of those hills and just all of the movement in there. Again, this course, we've done a lot more of it in later courses now, especially Atlantis, which just released. But yeah, this course just had so much more movement and life than any previous course. Flowers, all of the wind, but yeah, just all of those windmills. There was actually a decent bit of work optimizing, and now that we've got that figured out, again, we can take all of those learnings and apply them to courses moving forward. So it seems like every single course we come up with a couple of new little details that really become part of our tool set. One of the other little details I love, and not a lot of people notice it, but it's actually a pretty cool technical feat, is if you look out at the lightning in the clouds, you notice that you're actually also seeing the reflection in the ocean, which was a fancy trick. I don't even know exactly how Craig did that. I believe that he actually has the shaders synced to the lightning together, so it allows a little extra way of animating those. But yeah, it's a little detail that not a lot of people realize, but yeah, especially on Quest, that's a really challenging thing to get those reflections, or especially animated reflections. So it's great to just give those little touches that really make the world feel real and bring them to life. This was also a change in the walkabout path. This was the very first time that we ever had the walkabout path actually wrap back around and pass through. You actually have to walk back across the bridge of hole 10 in order to get down into the little glade here where the green of hole 18 is. Hole 18 on this course was also, we like making those hole 18s like something special, something big, something that's really fun to end the round on. And this has now become a bit of an iconic one, just because it feels more like regular golf. It's actually almost like a par 3 in regular golf that's not very far, but that you actually have to hit it down, avoid the wind. And hard mode, we actually struggled a little bit to come up with what were we actually going to do. And then finally we realized that adding these cypress trees is almost like a little barrier that you've only got a couple of spots that you can really get through. It just made it a really cool, a very iconic hole 18 that we've done stuff similar to this ever since, just because of how much fun people have playing this one. It also serves as it's a really fun tee shot, but then it also really puts your putting skills to the test, because you've got a much bigger green than we typically deal with. Again, this really does feel almost more like big golf than it does traditional mini golf. So anyways, that is Quixote Valley night mode. Thanks for checking it out.